that something along the lines of what happened in 1987 must have taken place within the last 72 hours. And what happened then was when Joe Biden was running for president and got ensnared in a scandal, supposedly plagiarizing a British politician, Neil Kinnock, uh,
Yes.
he had a come to Jesus meeting with his closest advisors, and his best friend Ted Kaufman told him, "Joe, it's time to step aside. This will not end." So I'm not saying that I know exactly what happened here, but I suspect what happened was that a cold calculation was made that the bottom had fallen out, that this controversy would never end, the controversy over his age, that his support had fallen away, the so-called electeds and the donors, and that he needed to look at reality. Because I suspect that to this moment, that Joe Biden still thinks he could have won this election, and and believes that he could have served another 4 years, but he had this cold reality staring him in the face, and he finally accepted it. And I think it's a brave and necessary decision.
Because I think, and you will know as his biographer, it goes against his character to
Yeah, it
withdraw in the face of
absolutely
odds.
does. And look, it was sudden, I think, because we saw as recently as this morning, we saw his good friend Chris Coons, the senator, out there saying that he's still in it. Um, and then we had this somewhat shocking, but in the end, not surprising announcement, which was around, I think it was 2 o'clock Eastern time today. So I, I think it happened. It happened slowly and then suddenly.
As many things do when it comes to political
Sure.
end games. Let's turn our attention to Kamala Harris. You will know the machinations of the Democrat Party much better than we do. Is there any way in which she is not the Democrat candidate for the presidency?
No, I'm convinced that she will be, barring some, very unlikely scenario. And of course, we've had a wild 3 weeks, so anything is possible. But no, I think she's the almost inevitable choice. She's been endorsed now by Joe Biden, by Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, by James Clyburn. Um, and I think that for a number of reasons. Number one, how are you going to deny the first black vice president in the history of the United States the nomination and then expect your most important critical constituency, black voters, to show up in November? It just seems like a recipe for disaster, for anyone else to take the nomination away from her. And after all, she along with Joe Biden got 14 million primary votes. So I think she will be the nominee.
How will she campaign? Do you think? I've seen some ads around which she's deliberately gone after comparing her political record with that of Donald Trump. Individual policy by policy. Do you think that's how she will go about it?
Yeah, I mean, for openers, she's the prosecutor running against the convicted felon. She is the woman who wants to protect women's reproductive rights from the guy who wants to ban abortion nationwide. Those are two very strong arguments just for openers. And I think obviously the hope here is that she will be able to prosecute this case against Trump far more effectively than Joe Biden, who simply didn't have it, you know, anymore. And so I think that there's a real, there's going to be real excitement around her ability to make that case.
It's worth remembering, actually, because for people, well, we don't know her history as much. She's a relative newcomer to national politics. Her career really was as an attorney general and as you say, as a prosecutor.
Yeah, and of course the downside, and there are plenty of downsides, and one of them is the fact that she ran a really inept presidential campaign in 2020. She started with a lot of money and some advantages, and that campaign simply imploded. So let's hope that the second time's the charm.
Is it possible she can win against Trump? Do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I really believe there is. Now, think about the last time we had a president step away from a second term voluntarily was 1968. Lyndon Johnson at the height of the Vietnam War, at a fractious, to put it mildly, Democratic convention in Chicago that year. All hell broke loose. There were riots. There was literally blood flowing in the streets. And yet, the nominee who came out of that divided convention, Hubert Humphrey, made up a 15-point deficit and almost caught Richard Nixon and nearly won that election. Had he had 2 more weeks, he might have. Anything's possible, and I think there's a real, there's a real kind of complacency on the other side of the aisle. That GOP convention was scripted to a fare thee well until Donald Trump walked out in the last night and ripped the script to shreds and went off on this ridiculous, unhinged tangent about Hannibal Lecter. So, look, this is a winnable race, I think, but nobody thinks it'll be easy.
We should just take a moment to reflect on Joe Biden. You talked about Nixon there. He came to Washington when Nixon was still president. An extraordinary lengthy political career. How will history remember Joe Biden, do you think?
It's just been an extraordinary career. As you say, he came to Washington in 1972, decades of achievement, including as head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, vice president for 8 years, and then the most consequential presidency of my lifetime, I would say, even though it's a one-term presidency. He came into office facing more daunting challenges than any president since FDR. An economy in free fall, once in a century pandemic, a challenge to democracy after a violent insurrection, global warming, racial injustice. He had more challenges than anyone in modern history, and has a really impressive record of achievement and bipartisan legislation, helping to rally NATO to face down Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. So he comes away, I think, look, he'll get an enormous boost from this, as did Lyndon Johnson when he stepped away. There's going to be tremendous goodwill toward Joe Biden, and he should be out there campaigning for Kamala too.
He said he will address the nation later this week. Does what he say matter for the outcome, and how should he approach it?
I think it's a great opportunity for him because, as I say, I think he comes away from this announcement with the wind in his sails, with tremendous goodwill. You can see it already among people being interviewed on the street, just talking about him and how grateful they are for his presidency. And he's a decent man with a tremendous record of achievement in the first 4 years, which turned out to be his last. So I think he'll have all of that affection. I think will help if he can put his support behind Kamala Harris. That's going to be helpful.